Just back to a question around imposter syndrome. That's one of the things, right? It's like, oh my goodness, am I good enough to do this? What if I make a mistake?
Even as leaders, we are worried to make a mistake in front of our employees.
Hi everyone, welcome to Can We Just Talk Career Edition. I'm Elizabeth, Editor-in-Chief at Howell. Can We Just Talk is a series where we want to provide inspiration and useful insights for you. And for the Career Edition, this was based on our 2024 What Women Want survey, where we spoke to Singaporeans between the age of 25 to 40, where we asked them about questions related to the workplace and their career progression. Today's topic is on leadership and culture. And today we have two very special guests with us. We have Eugenia as well as Lyn.
Hi everybody, so my name is Eugenia. I'm the founder and the brand owner of Nodspark. So we do DIY beauty for busy modern ladies. We focus on nail wraps and also DIY lashes.
Hi, I'm Lyn Lee. I'm the Chief Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Officer for Shell.
Thanks, Eugenia and Lyn. Can you share a bit more about your journey to getting where you are today?
I've had a long journey in terms of self-discovery. So in my early career, it was much more around maybe just accepting what people wanted of me.
Okay.
And also accepting things that were probably not very inclusive. Where I am now today, I'm very conscious of some of those things that I had gone through in terms of non-inclusive behaviors.
When I first started my own business, my first business also, there wasn't many female entrepreneurs in that position, or there weren't so many of us coming out to set an example for other people. So I think a lot of it was a lot of self-learning, which made the progress very slow for myself, but very heartened to see how dynamic the entrepreneur circle is for ladies especially.
So I want to read an interesting stat that we actually found from our What Women Want survey. It says that one of the few factors that hinder career progression, number one, 81% say that unconscious bias from managers actually hindered their careers, followed by 67% of them who say that unhelpful gender stereotyping actually hindered their career progression, and 55% believe that a lack of self-confidence also played a part in terms of hindering their career progression. I know, fun fact, a little bit told me, Lyn, you don't like the phrase unconscious bias.
Definitely do not like it.
Are these stats a surprise to you?
So I think I was really surprised at 81% because that's almost every woman in the workplace. Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why I do not like that term. Because if you hear the term unconscious and bias, then it actually gives a lot of excuse for people to behave in a certain way, to say, oh, but I wasn't conscious. And it's hardwired. It's passive as well, right? It means that this person doesn't have to do anything. And the person who is receiving the bias then has to accept it. The other term that everyone should be thinking about is conscious inclusion, which is an active term, right? It's something that you can do about, because consciousness means it's overt. It means that you need to understand as well, what are their expectations? Again, especially in the workplace, there must be a culture around how everyone would feel included, because that's the only way you can get your job done.
And Eugenia, for yourself, having businesses dealing with beauty, I think you probably also meet women in the workplace who actually may come to you and talk to you about self-confidence issues as well. Is that something that you see a lot?
Definitely. I think first and foremost is the emphasis being placed on beauty itself. I think the struggle is because people don't know where to look for solutions. I do have a lot of conversations with female it can be even like mothers who have stayed away from the workforce for a long time. They want to go back into the workforce, but they don't know where to start with something as what comes natural to some other women as like beauty or how to look put together. But I think it's a lot of the self-confidence, that issue that probably could be talked about more first before the next layer of putting on other things.
You mentioned about becoming mothers. There was a stat that we actually have that said 41% of the women that we surveyed believe that becoming a mother actually led to a career setback for them. Do you all see that for yourselves, and do you see that maybe with the colleagues or maybe with the teams that you work with?
For myself, yes, it's a huge struggle. Even as a business owner also, so far I haven't had employees who needed to take maternity and all that. But if that happened, how would I react as a business owner? Even though if I'm a mother, but I think when you're a business owner, because you control the finances and all that, and as a business owner, it was good that I had to think of what my actions would be, what kind of policies would I put in place, or what kind of setup would I put for that particular worker as well. in terms of hiring also, would I hire mothers? A lot of them actually are looking for flexible work arrangements.
Yeah.
And as a mother myself, I know how flexible I want my work arrangements to be as well. So I think as long as you educate yourself with what people want, what the modern woman would like to have at the workplace, I think is very important, because at the end of the day, what you want is everybody to work together in their best zones. It might not be the most comfortable for everybody, because if somebody's on maternity, somebody else has to cover up for that person. But I think it's everybody being aware of what's the situation, educating each other on their preferences, comfort level, and moving towards in a singular direction as a company.
Well, I agree with what Eugenia has said around the fact that maybe accommodating different preferences, right, or needs for flexible working may actually make the organization uncomfortable, or the line manager or the business owner who has never had to deal with it, right? But discomfort doesn't mean you don't do it. Yeah, so that's the other thing, right? It's good to understand that if it's uncomfortable, it means that it's a new situation. Yeah. So as a leader, your role is really to understand what is the context. So I'll start from my own experience. I have 2 grown girls, young adults in their 20s. And when I was pregnant with my eldest daughter, I was working in a consulting firm. And within a week of joining, I found out that I was pregnant. I was really nervous about telling my boss, and I was thinking now, why was I nervous? I wasn't lying or anything. But I overheard a water cooler conversation between my 2 colleagues, and there was a female colleague who was talking to line manager to say, I told you, if you hire someone who is married, she's going to get pregnant and she won't be around. And mind you, at that point in time, there was only 2 months maternity leave, which is not a lot of time. Yeah, so I think with that perspective, as a leader, one of the things which I'm very conscious of is that I have to again role model what it is in terms of different needs. Yeah, and how do you reach out to people who may be uncomfortable sharing? Because I think for a lot of women, I think in the context of Singapore, there are still many women who feel pressure, and probably insecure if they are pregnant. I think the first question that comes to mind would be, will I get a setback in my career? Which was what you found out from the survey. Yeah, and I think for organizations, my appeal is this. Firstly, we need to start to think about things like flexible work schedule. It is not a cost. It means planning mindfully. That's one. And I think for the women, to not feel guilty for being a mother and not feel guilty for asking for accommodations. It really means, though, that you have to put yourself out there. So you have to step up. And then one last point I want to make is this. It's not a women's responsibility only. Yeah, so you also see in the Singapore policies that you now have paternity leave, which has been extended, and maternity leave, because it is about caregiving from both sides. And I think that helps to balance, right? Otherwise, it's just one person who is bearing all of the cost of having a child.
I definitely think the new policies with increased paternity and maternity leave, and especially starting in April, I think in 2025, is really a good move in the right direction.
But we have to make sure that we encourage the men to say it's fine. Don't feel like if you are taking paternity leave that you are slacking at work. I heard this joke, and it was from my colleagues, right? Because we're trying to extend paternity leave. One of the gentlemen from India, I think, was saying that, oh dear, it means that people will think that we're just taking time off to go play golf. Yeah, so I think it's, again, all these mindsets that we have to change.
Both genders have different responsibilities in terms of career, in terms of making a home, having a family.
But if I may add to that also, I think as leaders in our own rights, is the kind of conversations that we have, even on a casual basis. So just being mindful, being a leader, it takes more work to proactively say certain things,
Or not say certain things.
Oh,
right?
yes, absolutely, So I think it's really having that awareness, but also practice to be very respectful and courteous in our thoughts, no matter how casual the conversation might be, because that goes really a long way.
So on the topic of self-confidence and self-belief, why do you think as women leaders, a lot of us feel this sense of imposter syndrome. I admit that I do feel that sometimes, especially when you're younger and you're being put in charge of a team that may be older than you. You always feel like, will people understand where I'm coming from? Will they misunderstand me? Will they understand my direction and my leadership? Why do you think imposter syndrome is such an issue with women?
In Shell, we run a women's program, and we have a program for early career, mid-career, senior. So I sponsor the program, and in the past 2 years, we've actually got a lot of data and insights. Maybe I'll share a little bit. I think, the imposter syndrome comes from a few things. The first insight that we got was that a lot of women, especially at mid-level to senior level, are very hyper-focused on delivery. So much so that that's all you focus on, and you forget about your personal values and also what you connect well with. Without the connection to personal values, sometimes you kind of lose yourself. So that's one of the insights that we got. The second one is that many times we're asked to have a learner's mindset. But I think with a learner's mindset too is self-awareness. And many times, more so for women, we're told in the past to always focus on developing, which means that you look at your weakness. But I think in the state of learner's mindset, sometimes you forget that you have strengths that you can build on. And that's very important if you want to learn. And if you want to free yourself, having that self-awareness on what you're good at, very important. And I think the last point is being vulnerable and asking for help. Imposter syndrome, of course I felt it too, right? When I was asked to do the job that I'm doing now, I was thinking like, oh my goodness, I don't think I'm capable of doing this. It is so big. But I think you have to put into perspective to say, but nobody asked you to do it on your own, right? So I think it's that vulnerability to ask for help, to also get support from others. But I think it needs the confidence to be able to articulate.
For myself, I think that the imposter syndrome would come in at different stages, because when you reach a certain stage, you will always plateau your growth, and then you would dip for a while and then you continue. So it's always a cycle with your personal progression, corporate progression, or even a business progression as well. So I think the imposter syndrome would set in when you feel like you're at a dip as well. Everybody still perceives you in the same way, and that's where you question yourself, like, am I up to it? Why am I selected for this role? Why am I selected to attend this event or even be part of this panel and things like that? Even for people who have been in the business for a long time, I do a lot of peer mentoring with other work friends, and it comes in all the time. But I think it's having the understanding of yourself and where you draw the confidence from. It doesn't always have to be the role that you're at that defines you as a person. So I think when you fully understand what you can bring to the table and what you can grow upon, that's where you actually break out of that imposter syndrome, at least for a period of time. It might seep in again, but I think it's understanding how you draw your boundaries with regards to that outlook.
I mean, honestly, I don't feel like imposter syndrome is all bad. I do think it makes us look inward, be introspective about where our strengths and weaknesses are, as you've mentioned, Lyn. So I think it also drives us, to be better. Eugenia mentioned about peer mentoring, and mentorship is something that's very important at her role. Eugenia, you should know, we launched our mentorship program last year and you were one of our mentors. Why is mentorship important? And do you all personally have mentors or mentees in your life that you always reach out to or you touch base with often?
For myself, yes. My own journey, I was always searching for a mentor. My previous business also, I was very, very lost. When I started my second business, Nodspark, that was where the whole entrepreneur space really grew, and there was a lot more support. Being a mentor was my way to reach out to similar profile person of how I was back then. That being said, even as a mentor, I myself need to have my own mentor and coaches as well, because it's a lifelong process of learning where there is no end to it, and you need to be supported. And I think being able to see your own blind spots through another lens brings you better perspective as a leader. I really do enjoy reaching out to my mentees as well from time to time, even though we're past the initial relationship. Past a certain point, it really becomes like they're mentoring me back in a certain way as well.
So I think as I get more senior in the organization, I actually appreciate much more in terms of being mentored by someone younger, right? So what we call reverse mentoring, because the wisdom goes both ways, right? I feel too that sometimes when you're in a more senior leadership position, that you don't always get the truth, right? It's been filtered so that you only hear what people think you want to hear. So having a reverse mentor who's able to also speak to the truth, because mentoring is very specific. you must be clear around the objectives, and you must be clear around the outcomes. Yeah, so having that in terms of reverse mentoring was good for me. So I've had a few very specific to objective and outcomes that I want. So I think that's the beauty in terms of that accountability, that mentorship is good if both sides play their part. It's not given that you'll be successful. I think some thought has to go into what do you want to get from it? Is this the right person? Yeah, and also sometimes for women, other women can be role models, but other women can also be in your way, right? So again, it depends on what it is that you're looking for.
What do you both think about this shift in traditional form of leadership where it's more top-down, maybe a bit more authoritarian, towards a more mentorship-based kind of leadership, or even, I would say, a more inclusive way of leading? What are your thoughts about this, and do you see that in both of your organizations?
I definitely see it in Shell. That's how I've grown up. Maybe just to put it into perspective, I look at it in terms of what are the traits of a good leader. So I think some of the traits would be what Eugenia has mentioned earlier on as well, right? Being able to observe what other people need, which means that you need to be empathetic. You probably need to listen, because sometimes people don't always tell you exactly what their needs are. So you need to be listening carefully, being clear around the boundaries. So here I'm talking about inclusive behaviors, right? What is accepted versus not, and also what are the consequences of both good and bad behaviors. So I think role modeling that. I guess to your question around authoritarian, that one probably is easier, not to say it's right. If you're a leader at the top and you go like, I told you to do, right? And if the question is asked why, you go like, don't ask, right? So that's very easy, because it doesn't need for the leader to do anything except to hand down orders. So obviously that doesn't work. If we're talking about people who work with you who have different needs, different expectations, different talents, different skills.
I think like the handing out orders, it might sound like you can move faster, but it's quite short term, because in the long run, you get a lot of high turnovers. One thing I enjoy about running my own business as a business owner is that I get to dictate what kind of culture I want at the workplace. But the thing about being more inclusive, or having a very broad kind of communication as a company would mean that you need to draw a lot of boundaries as well. It sounds very favorable from the employee's point of view, but for the business owner, there's a lot that we have to deal with in terms of like drawing the line. So are they my friend? Are they not my friend? How can I put across a message that they need to back up on certain areas? So there's a lot of grey areas when you have that kind of setup, and I think even more so for a small business owner. But I would say that you get a lot of intrinsic returns in terms of like them really working their hearts out for you, because they know that you have their back.
And I really like that, because I think it's about failure as part of the journey.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think, again, a lot of us are just afraid to fail, right, at work.
Yes,
If we're being criticized,
up,
penalized, so we cover up. And I think that also, just back to your question around imposter syndrome, that's one of the things, right? It's like, oh my goodness, am I good enough to do this? What if I make a mistake?
Even as leaders, we are worried to make a mistake in front of our employees as well.
For me, I personally feel like it's about failing and failing fast. Fail fast, pivot, and then kind of see what else we can do. That's very important to have that mindset.
And I think it's good to actually show our team that we fail too, so that they don't need to be afraid to fail, because it's important. It's how they grow from the failure that gives them the growth actually, more than anything.
Lyn, on a larger organizational level, how does one build an inclusive culture? Can we actually answer that? I feel like it's such a giant question.
There are many processes to kind of sense the organization. So for example, in Shell, we annually run a survey in terms of employee experience, to find out how they're doing. In those questions are questions that targets whether the organization and leaders and peers are inclusive or not. I think that's one way, but I think the most important, again, is back to this. It is about the people that you work with every day. And to make it very simple, so it's not a giant question with a giant task and demand, is to think about how you go to work every day. Do you wake up and feel that you really want to go to work because you like the work, and you wake up energized and you're not afraid? right? You're not going in feeling like, oh dear, I don't know what mistake I'm going to make. That feeling itself will tell you that you are in an inclusive, psychologically safe organization or space versus when you fear many things. Yeah, those are all indicators. Back to your question again, how do you build inclusion? Starts with the leader. The leaders have to set their expectations. What is expected and what is accepted versus what's not. Yeah, and very clear in terms of role modeling when things are out of line. Yeah, and I think sometimes leaders don't like to play that role, don't want to deal with that, but it's your job. Yeah,
also,
very
the higher you
important.
go, I think the more of managing
Yes.
comes into play rather than sometimes the
Actual work.
doing, you know.
Yeah. No, and leading, and I think that's the difference between managing and leading. When you're leading through what you are doing. Yeah. Role modeling what's right versus what may not be right. Yeah. So I think it's very important. Yeah. I think, just setting the right examples.
And I think, Eugenia, we also spoke, prior conversations that we had about, team bonding and team building is so important. And I personally felt it when, we were working from home during the COVID years, right? And when we got back to office, by the way, I'm someone who loves hybrid, so I'm not all for working from home or all from in office. I prefer a balance. But I do feel that I miss actually seeing my colleagues. I miss talking to them. When we come in those few days a week, you have that kind of synergy when we have during meetings. I really enjoyed that and enjoy it now still. So I think team bonding is really a very important part of building inclusion as well.
I think people energize people, and the positive energy can be felt throughout. So the contact is very important. And in my company, in my business, very, very particular about that, and very protective of it. In fact, once in a while you get not so pleasant person coming through, and I think it's how you really learn to manage the difficult ones as well. But as a business owner, then another privilege is that we get to choose who we want to hire. But of course, sometimes you wouldn't know until the person is in, and then you see the personalities being reflected as not what you expected them to be. But I think it's very important to safeguard the basis of your culture. And if anything is a bit out of place, then I think it's for the leaders to actually protect that culture, because a culture takes years to be built, but it can be taken away so easily just by one person as well.
I want to go back to what Lyn mentioned about the leader being the first example about setting an inclusive culture. One of the survey findings that we had was 37% of the women that we surveyed said that bad management was the highest factor of stressing them out at work. This was followed by 23% who said a growing workload, and then a 19% that said unrealistic expectations and deadlines. This leads to my next question, which is about role models. When both of you started, your careers respectively, were there role models you looked up to, whether it was in the workplace or, just within the industry?
If you have more senior women or you have more women in leadership positions, it indicates that other women see the possibilities of getting there. You can only vision and envision, something that you can see. But having said that though, I think, again, back to what we've discussed just now, it's not just the women who have to inspire other women. It is the organization, right? Both men and women. What is the culture and what are the expectations? Where's the place for women? I was pondering what you just said around bad management. Yeah, and I wonder if there's such a thing, Bad management equates people who are not doing the right things.
Right.
Yeah, so it's traits that have not been addressed, right? Bad traits, behaviors that have been tolerated, versus traits which leaders would demonstrate where there are certain behaviors that are not accepted, right? Where it will be called out, where even people who are not leaders, peers or someone else would intervene. Yeah, but to have that type of culture, the leaders have to show that it's safe. You can do that, right? That you can also intervene when a leader shows behaviors that are not so good. So I think you also have to be humble enough to say, if I do say something or if I behave in a way which you think is not acceptable, then let me know, because then I can learn from it. So I think that's also the type of role modeling that is.
That's accountability as
Yes,
well.
yeah, and humility, because leaders are not infallible, I mean, we're all human beings, which means that we'll make mistakes, but you have to be humble enough to say that I will learn from my mistakes, so I'd really like for you to tell me. And that's not always easy, because you also don't want to be a leader who seems weak. So vulnerable and weak is different too, right? I think the first thing is always to say, I can make mistakes. Yeah, and how do I learn from my mistakes?
The important part is being able to make the mistake, but also being able to say, I can change and move on from there. For me, I would say that being in the circle of female businesses, owners as well, I've come across a lot of them. I get to see how they run their businesses and realize that actually it's very possible to have similar cultures in my own business as well. I mean, in my business, we do beauty. The people who come to are usually female. And what some of the feedback that I've heard from other business owners is that female employees are very sensitive, all those terms come out. But I've seen so many beautiful businesses blooming because they take care of their workers, they have a structure, they have a policy, they have good culture, right from the top all the way down, and it can actually work very well. They really inspire me to be a lot more open to having conversations with my team, being able to be more exposed to different business owners and how they run their company has helped me greatly with how I also formulate my own culture.
To end off our discussion today, I have a final question I want to pose to both of you. What advice would you give to someone who, was recently promoted into a leadership position? What advice would you have for a young leader like that?
Just, empower yourself and release that rebel in you. Who do you really want to be? And don't be afraid. Go for it. Yeah. Most of the time, that's what will make you blossom. And that's what will really make you shine.
Mine is very similar as well. It's all about time, really. Yeah. It's all about finding your own voice, your own confidence, because without which you can try to be a version of who you're not. You can fake it as long as possible, but at the end of the day, you're going to get lost in your own self if that's not the true you as well. So take time to understand yourself, what you want to achieve, how you want to be seen, of course, but how you actually feel about yourself, and go out there, talk to as many people as you can. Through the conversations, you'll find yourself as well.
My personal takeaway, after having been a leader for a few years, is challenges, when you're going through them, they are terrible, they're heartbreaking. But when you come out from the other end of the tunnel, you realize that these challenges actually really help you to grow, both as a leader and as a person, right, as a human being. Be kind to yourself, because after a while, you really start to realize who you are as a person, as a leader, and that really helps you in your journey. Thank you everyone for watching this episode of Can We Just Talk Career Edition. I hope you enjoyed our discussion on culture and leadership. For more career articles, head to homo.com and stay tuned for our next episode. See you!